Hey, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you're at. Welcome back to LWN Network. I am Tammy Nation, your host of Headline Hits Monday through Thursday at noon Eastern Standard Time. And I hope everybody had a great weekend. It is March 24th, 2025, and it is a Monday. And Mondays can be pretty wild and crazy, and today is no exception. We've got a lot of good headlines to get into for you guys with the news this morning. A lot happened over the weekend. So let's go ahead and get started. Once again, thanks for joining me. Don't forget to hit the like button, share, and subscribe for this channel if you like what you see in here. First up, we have Barack Obama was using USAID to pretend to send aid overseas, but was laundering it to train rent-a-riots instead. According to Mike Benz, a former Trump state official and founder of the Foundation of Freedom Online, as he appeared on the Judge Rogan podcast. That's what he had to say. As we dive into this story, this was a scandal during the Obama USAID era. We were running a number of rogue USAID operations in Cuba at the time, he stated. I'm simply showing the American people where your tax dollars are going and how these things are structured in order to systematically fool you and to fool Congress and to fool the White House. USAID pumped $1.2 billion in, and we sponsors these activist groups and these civil society organizations to learn how to use Facebook, learn how to use Twitter, learn how to use hashtags, and learn how to coordinate street protests so that everyone knows where to go, what street to show up on, what kind of slogans to know, and what to use in order to create the pro-democracy predicate for it. He then talks about how Obama funded a Twitter clone that would be used to push propaganda in Cuba to inspire these protests and overthrow the government. Mike Benz explains how Barack Obama overthrew many governments in this interview. So what they did is they took the exact same thing as Twitter, same user interface, same like and retweet button. Zunzanillo is the Cuban slang word for hummingbird, so it means bird. It was like Twitter bird, the whole thing. But the whole trick about it was you have to make it look like it's coming from the Cubans if you're going to do this operation. They started running this in 2010, which right during the Arab Spring. They were using USAID funds that were designated to Pakistan. Contractors were funded by USAID. The data would then be used for micro-targeting efforts towards anti- and pro-government users in Cuba. The developers aimed to, at first, use non-controversial content, such as sports and music or hurricane updates. What was the plan? What the whole time? Well, once they built up enough subscribers, they would begin to introduce political messages through social bots and encourage dissent in this astroturfing. The whole point is, once they hit a critical mass, they would create rent-a-riots. You're using Cayman Island bank accounts. You're earmarking it for Pakistani aid, but the money was never sent to Pakistan. It was sent to the Cayman Islands to fund this whole operation. Barack Obama was indeed using USAID, according to Benz, to pretend to send money to a country for aid instead of laundering it to he was laundering it to the Cayman Islands. He would then use that money to fund and train rent-a-riots for protests to overthrow governments. And now we are seeing, as this stuff comes to disclosure, why Democrats are losing it after President Trump shut down USAID, because that is the Democrat Party's slush fund. So not a very good article there. Nothing that is good for the country. It's once again underhanded, corrupt, and not what it was meant to be, USAID. As we continue on to the next story, according to Andrew Sullivan, a British political commentator and author, Fauci lied about lab leaks to save his reputation. There's a reason his pardon goes back to 2014, he states. The Breitbart article continues and said, Andrew Sullivan said that the former NIAID director, Dr. Anthony Fauci, lied to cover the possibility that COVID leaked from a lab because you don't want to go down in history as the person who helped develop the virus that killed millions of people. You want to go down as the one who saved millions of people. Sullivan responds to questions on reports that British intelligence knew that the lab leak theory was correct by stating that German intelligence also knew. He added the core paper that killed off any idea that this was a lab leak in China, the proximal origin paper, which was produced with Fauchi and Collins of the NIH and NIAID helping it along, was a lie, a conscious lie. The people who looked at it, we now have our emails, and their emails are saying that in the very first days of looking at the virus, this looks very man-made to us, according to the emails. Sullivan further said, the question is why? Why would they lie to us about that? And they did. Sullivan further stated this lab was a gain-of-function lab. The gain-of-function research was always dangerous. Everyone knew it was dangerous a long time ago. Do you know who was the biggest supporter of gain-of-function research in the last 30 years? You guys can take a guess. Yes, Anthony Fauci. There was a reason that he was given a pardon that went back to 2014. There is something very wrong going on here. Sullivan added that he doesn't think Fauci was trying to make himself rich, but that he knew from the very get-go, the start off, that the Wuhan lab had security levels that were the average of a dentist's office. They should have been at the highest level imaginable. He knew that. Not only that, NIH and NIAID helped fund it. So you don't want to go down in history as the person who had developed the virus, like you said, that killed millions of people. You want to go down as the one who saved millions of people. That's what was at stake. It's a reputational matter when it comes to Fauci. So I don't think very many of us are surprised by that. This is just furthering what we thought about everything with COVID and the lab, et cetera, et cetera. Once again, as everything's coming to fruition, exposure, we're seeing that a lot of these so-called conspiracy theorists or theories come true. We're seeing it in documentation, and it's continuing all these years later, not for the benefit of the United States citizens or the world, but to gain money, to gain fame, to gain whatever control, whatever it is these corrupt politicians wanted to gain over this. Next up, we have President Donald J. Trump dropped a political bombshell on Friday, signing an executive order that yanks security clearances from some of the most notorious figures on the left that has been going against President Trump. The list reads like a who's who of Trump haters and deep state operatives, including Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. Trump once more listed Antony Blinken, Jacob Sullivan, Letitia James, Alvin Bragg, and even Joe Biden, along with his entire corrupt family, for this list. Trump's order declares that these individuals will no longer have any business around classified information. Trump stated, I have determined that it is no longer in the national interest for the following individuals to access information, the president stated, before laying out a laundry list of names that conservatives have long identified as threats to national security and common sense governance. There's a complete list of the security access of people that have been stripped. Let's read through here real quick and see if you recognize the names. Antony Blinken, the former Secretary of State. Jake Sullivan, former National Security Advisor. Lisa Monaco, former Deputy Attorney General. Mark Zaid, lawyer. Norman Eisen, lawyer and senior fellow at Brookings. Letitia James, we hear a lot about her, New York Attorney General. Alvin Bragg, Manhattan District Attorney, got his security clearance taken away as well. Andrew Weissman, a lawyer. We know Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State. Elizabeth Cheney, former Wyoming representative. Kamala Harris, the former VP. Adam Kinzinger, former Illinois representative, and we just did a story on him last week or so about him telling Trump, come on, buddy, let's go at it. If you want to hold me accountable for my J6 thoughts and what I put out there, let's go. We know that he's just the way he presented it, it was just shy of a boxing match, basically threatening Trump, go ahead, because he goes, I'm going to own you. Fiona Hill, former White House Russian expert. Alexander Vindman, we know him, retired lieutenant colonel. Joseph Biden, Biden's out, and any other member of Joseph Biden's Jr.'s family. So Biden and his family completely out all the security clearances. Trump stated, therefore, I hereby direct every executive department and agency head to take all additional action as necessary and consistent with existing law to revoke any security clearances held by the aforementioned individuals and to immediately rescind their access to classified information. I also direct all executive department and agency heads to revoke unescorted access to secure United States government facilities from all these individuals. This action includes, but is not limited to, receipt of classified briefings such as President's Daily Brief, and access to classified information held by any member of the intelligence community by virtue of the named individual's previous tenure in Congress. In the event that any of the named individuals received a security clearance by virtue of their employment with a private entity, the United States government entity that granted the security clearance should inform the private entity that these individuals' ability to access classified information has been revoked, the order read. Earlier this month, Tulsi Gabbard confirmed that she had revoked all their security clearances on Trump's orders, along with the 51 signers of the Hunter Biden disinformation letter. So we've got a lot of security clearances that have been revoked. I think that was a wonderful move upon Donald Trump's part. So next up, we have Obama appointed judge Jeb Boasberg. Now, we've talked about him a lot lately. He's the chief judge of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, but it's claimed during a 2023 speech before the University of Chicago law students that he believed the J6 defendants deserved harsher charges and called for new laws to punish them. This is the kind of judgeship that we are dealing with out there, everyone. In a 2023 speech to law students, Boasberg, who ruled over many J6 cases, openly admitted that the law wasn't harsh enough to punish. As we reported last week, Boasberg was issued a temporary restraining order to block the Trump administration from deporting Venezuelan migrants suspected of ties to the Trendy Aruga gang, claiming to have concerns over the use of the 1798 Alien Enemies Act, reviewing March 15th Venezuelan terrorist hearing transcript. This is the proceeding where Boasberg claimed to have issued a verbal order demanding the return of the TDA gang members off those planes. Remember, they were shipping them out, and he wanted them to turn around and fly back. This is something, Boasberg. These folks are going to be sent to a Salvadorian or Honduran prison, so he's worried about that. Boasberg, who presided over numerous January 6 cases, previously expressed frustration that the laws on the books didn't allow for harsher charges and complained about a gap in the justice system against J6ers, not against these gang members, everyone. The judge's comments came during the lecture in the U.S. District Court in the shadow of January 6th, where he reflected on sentencing the J6ers. According to reports, he told those students that the unprecedented nature of the event left prosecutors scrambling to match defendants' actions to existing statutes, noting there were no statutes that were written that said it's a criminal offense to storm the Capitol and interfere with the counting of certification of the Electoral College after the presidential election. Boasberg said a lot of law still to be made in this area, calling for legislative action to create harsher penalties tailored to January 6 defendants. The judge oversaw approximately 70 January 6 cases and consistently imposed prison sentence even for nonviolent offenses like parading in the Capitol, which is a misdemeanor. So we know a lot of this, but it's coming out that back in 2010, back in the day, he was still talking about harsher penalties for not criminals, for U.S. citizens. Sandra Wire was a 60-year-old Pennsylvania woman who committed a nonviolent act on J6 and was sentenced to 14 months in federal prison by Boasberg on a charge of obstruction, an official proceeding. The U.S. Supreme Court later deemed this charge inapplicable to most J6 cases in a 2024 ruling. Another defendant, Sarah Carpenter, who was a former NYPD officer, received a 22-month sentence from Boasberg on similar charges despite her lack of violent conduct. President Donald J. Trump has called Boasberg a radical left lunatic on his Truth social media. So this guy is at it full force. He's not stepping down or stepping back. He's continuing these ridiculous motions and thoughts, like I said, pro the criminals, anti-American citizens. Next up, Russia and the U.S. continue working out the details of the partial ceasefire. It's today, a meeting in Saudi Arabia. The U.S. delegations did meet with Ukraine yesterday. Expert former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Mr. Bill Taylor, spoke on Fox Live Now this morning. So this is breaking. He said that today the American delegation is talking to the Russian delegation. Yesterday, the American delegation talked to the Ukrainian delegation, and they had very good conversations about getting ready for today. He said these are not the high levels talks today that have been happening in the past. He said that they are not sending ministers, with the exception of Ukraine. They did send the Minister of Defense, who was there to represent or demonstrate how important these talks are to the Ukrainians. But on the Russia side, it's a lower level delegation, and they are prepared to talk about technical things. On the agenda for today are ceasefires in the regard with energy infrastructure. And the Americans had hoped that they would be able to broaden from energy infrastructure to the Black Sea, or even to the air, or even to land. But Mr. Putin did not go along with that request from President Trump. President Trump and President Zelensky had agreed, but President Putin did not. So now we're talking about technical conversations with the Russians today, following the discussion yesterday with the Ukrainians. Because as we know, and we're seeing, drone strikes are still continuing. So with the back and forth happening, it doesn't seem like the war is waning down. But until, this is what we need to know, the details of the ceasefire are agreed to, and they are not yet. That will not happen. What we have is basically a general commitment on the part of all three, the Americans, Ukrainians, and Russians. And it's a general commitment to do a ceasefire against energy infrastructure. However, they're hoping that it's going further, but there have not been any agreement on what is energy infrastructure. It's not in an agreement on yet. And when does it actually go into effect? How is this going to be monitored? Who will they identify the violations that do occur? And what happens if there are violations? So there's still a lot for them to discuss today, to get worked out, because a lot hasn't been dealt with yet. And another note, next up, we have the Pope Francis is arrived home at the Vatican after a 5-week hospital stay to beat life-threatening bout with pneumonia. We heard conflicting reports that, he was serious, then he wasn't serious, then he was incubated, then he wasn't incubated. But they're stating that he returned home to the Vatican from the hospital on Sunday after a 5-week life-threatening bout with pneumonia. He made a surprise stop at his favorite basilica on the way home before beginning 2 months of prescribed rest and recovery. So apparently we're not going to see much of him because he needs the 2 months off. The motorcade carried the 88-year-old Pope. He entered into Perugino Gate into Vatican City, and Francis was seen in the front passenger seat. He was wearing nasal tubes to give him supplemental oxygen, which obviously he still needs. Francis obviously didn't get out of the car, but he did hand a bouquet of flowers to the cardinal to place in front of the Salus Populi Romania icon, a Byzantine-style painting on wood that is revered by Romans. Before leaving the hospital, Francis gave a thumbs up and a nod to the crowd after he was wheeled out onto the balcony overlooking the main entry of that hospital and outdoors, and he said hundreds of people had gathered on Sunday morning to say goodbye. Next up, a little tidbit here. This story is quite a bit troubling and was posted by Elon Musk and then posted by President Trump over this weekend. Elon said very few people do know there is a major political party in South Africa that is actively promoting white genocide. The video was just released yesterday, a whole arena chanting about unaliving white people. A month ago, the South African government passed a law legalizing taking property from white people at will with no payment. Where is the outrage? Why is there no coverage by the media? Elon stated. Elon says Starlink can't get a license to operate in South Africa simply because I'm not black. How is that right? And we're going to have to keep an eye on this story as it develops. Obviously, taking property from anyone, at will, with no payment or anything and just stealing it away is unacceptable. So that story is just developing. Also, RFK Jr. over the weekend has announced that he is working with the states to remove cell phones from school. Now, cell phone use and social media use on the cell phone has been, he said, directly connected with depression, poor performance in schools, suicidal ideation, and substance abuse. While some people agree with taking phones out of schools, others worry because schools are not safe enough for that to happen. They want access to their children to be able to contact them, or the children being able to contact the parents, and so on. But RFK did state that other countries have done this, and the states that are now doing this are seeing positive results. Kennedy went on to state that the disadvantages of having a phone in our hands or close to our heads, the physical side effects can cause serious cell damage, and there's a lot of other things that can go on. But right now, it seems like generally people are split almost 50-50 with wanting to keep them in school for their children's safety, and some agreeing and saying the schools, are safe, that we need to go ahead and lessen the exposure to cell phones and the distractions of cell phones in our children's hands each and every day. And lastly, we have, during an interview on Air Force One this weekend, President Trump made a statement saying he believes Lee Harvey Oswald had some help with the assassination of former President JFK. Trump discussed his opinion, stating, "I have always felt that, of course, he was helped." Now, Trump's comment on the document dump turned out to be, he said, somewhat unspectacular. We all have been speaking about this on LWN Network, stating that there really was no major bombs in these documents. But he said, Trump said, maybe this somewhat unspectacular dump really might be a good thing. And he said, polls over the decades have shown that most Americans believe there was a conspiracy behind Kennedy's death. And his recent poll of 2023, over 60% of Americans believe this. So why it's a good thing, I don't know. Maybe he obviously knows more than we know, and he feels that this dump not being significant for whatever reason was probably good. But we all know we were kind of let down by that dump. We're all still actively awaiting for the Epstein files and more information to come from them. Hopefully we will get the released names and all that soon, and start being able to dive into those files and see what those documents have to produce for us, because a lot of us that have so-called conspiracy theories, I think, are going to be proved true once we are able to go through those documents. So that's what I have for you guys today for this Monday, March 24th, 2025, for Headline Hits on the LWN Network. I hope you guys will be able to join me tomorrow for another set, noon Eastern Standard Time. Till then, take care. God bless. Have a great rest of your Monday, and I will see everyone tomorrow. Bye-bye.